Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Let's have a look at a game from 2004 between 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen, playing on the white end, and Sipke Ernst. Both players were international masters at the time. A few months after this game, Carlsen would become a Grandmaster. A couple of years later, Ernst would become a Grandmaster. So this game was from the Group C section of the Corus Chess Tournament. Nowadays, it's noted as Tata Steel. So let's dive in and see what made this one so special. E4 by Carlsen, Ernst replying with the Caro-Kann. What variation? We have a mainline Caro-Kann. Knight g3, bishop back. h4 is looking to trap the bishop. That's not going to happen. Knight f3, ready to centralize with a punch. That's shot down. e5 is defended. A push. This guy is strong. He's exchanged. And one quick point here. I know we're still in middle game mode, but I've seen endgames where this instance of fixed pawns plays a role. White has, keep in mind, the correct harmony between the remaining bishop and fixed pawns in this case. You can see the white's dark square bishop in some endgames be a pest to the h6 pawn or even the g7 pawn. Continuing, we have e6, just getting some development in now. Minor pieces coming out. White queenside castles. Bishop e7. This is the worst minor piece on g3, so looking for a knight exchange. Knight reposition to e4. Queen a5. A couple things in mind with this, a2 and h5. a2 is secure. Don't want to budge with any of these pawns. a3 would be inviting tactics. Kingside castle. Going pawn hunting here for black. Not be a good choice. Too risky to take on h5 because d6 is a sensitive square. So for example, knight takes h5, you could hop in with either piece to d6 and it's uncomfortable. Computer is pointing out knight d6. This bishop is a killer. You're not going to kingside castle, and if you queenside castle, you're still not really safe with this bishop knifing into your position. So no time to be greedy. Instead, development time. Kingside castle it is. Pair of knights are exchanged. e5 is no longer covered, so he hops in, and at the same time cuts off the communication to h5. Black gets on a half-open file. Queen gets out of the line of fire. And this is where black now makes a slip on this move 17. On the surface, it doesn't appear like it's any big deal. c5 is the move in the game. There's an issue with this. It's typical to, strike at white center, have your third rank pawn advance and strike at your opponent's fourth rank pawn. There's an issue with this. A better move is queen b6, applying pressure to d4 and also having in mind a bishop a3 move. But in the game, c5 it is. So pop quiz to you. What move did 13-year-old Magnus Carlsen play in this position? Feel free to pause the video. Okay. In the game, we had knight to g6. How many of you came up with that one? Yeah, that's a star move for sure. We have a fork against the rook and bishop. In the game, the knight is captured, but just to quickly point out, if this move is, if black replies with rook on f to e8, white can simply take out the bishop and then take on c5, and white's up a pawn. No great way to regain the pawn. Certainly can't take it now. You drop the rook. And if you exchanged rooks first and then tried to pick up the pawn, that's still no good. Bishop d6, and that's painful. So, black takes the knight. And this now allows the queen to sweep into e6. That's a check. Cannot block. Pawn takes pawn would just pile up on the pinned rook. So the king gets out of the way, goes to the corner, and what to do from here? Is the idea to simply regain this minor piece? Queen takes bishop? No. Instead, we have h takes g, opening up the h-file. White is now converging on h6. Why not pick up the bishop? Well, queen takes bishop is met with knight d5, striking at the queen and the bishop. The bishop would actually be struck at twice. Best is to take on g6. White is simply winning here. Continuing, we have knight to g8. There's some serious threats in mind here to maybe take the bishop one move later, right? Because knight to d5, there's all of a sudden some tricks here. This pawn on g6 is a great thorn and allows white some mate threats on the h7 square. So in the game, we have knight to g8 defending the bishop, defending h6, but Carlsen says, you're not really defending h6. Bishop takes h6. And what to do? Knight takes. Well, in the game it's pawn takes, but if knight takes, the rook is smashing through. The queen is taking the bishop, and what are you doing about queen to h7? It's already a mate in 4. Can't stop this. So in the game, it's pawn takes bishop. Rook takes pawn. This is a lot of material that white is giving up. Knight takes rook is forced. King here is met with rook h7, game over. So knight takes rook, queen takes bishop only now, and once more, how are you parrying this serious threat of queen h7? Knight f7 is best, and is the move played in the game. Pawn takes knight, white is down a rook, but how valuable is this pawn on the 7th rank? All sorts of mating threats. Rook h1, queen coming over here, g and h files all covered. Let's see how this one finishes up. King to g7. We have rook to d3. Let's not forget, this is the lone defender of the back rank squares, and he's now getting a little bit aggressive. It's important to note we have e1 covered. We don't have a flight square yet. Carlsen doesn't have a flight square yet, but this is covered. And the rook is ready to transfer to the g file. So what's tried here is rook to d6. You can't take the bait. You get mated. Rook g3 follows. Rook to g6. Queen e5 check. And what to do from here. King h6 is a mate in 1. If the king goes to h7, it's going to be a mate in 5. With a check, another check, and the queen sweeping into g7. In the game, how it played out, king takes pawn, queen f5 follows, and from here, if the king moves, we wouldn't take the rook with either the queen or the rook, but rather play rook e3 first. So for example, if black played king e7, we have to be mindful of this mate threat. Rook e3 first, and then the king has to make a move, and you could actually take whichever rook will end up giving check to the black king next. That's not how it played out, though. The king did not go here. Instead, we had rook f6 and a very picturesque mate, epaulette mate, queen to d7. How beautiful is that? This game was actually, I looked into it, this was the penultimate round of this Group C section, and this win here secured Carlsen his first Grandmaster norm. So I thought that was an interesting thing to point out. In fact, this game by Ernst was the only game he ended up losing in the tournament. He finished second to Carlsen. So anyhow, feel free, as usual, to leave any feedback to this video in the comment section below. And I hope you enjoyed it. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.